Hello, the purpose of this screencast is to give you additional notes on the abolition movement. You already have some notes on the digital antebellum reforms worksheet, but this will give you additional information that is very useful and helpful to fully understanding the abolition movement during the antebellum period. Be prepared to pause throughout this presentation or screencast because I'm going to move at a pretty steady pace, so if I'm moving too fast, you can always pause. The topic or purpose is abolition movement, and that's what you will write in your notes page. And then you will start with an uppercase A for the first subtopic. So again, abolition movement is the purpose of the notes page. This may take more than one notes page, so be prepared to flip to the next notes page, which of course are always on the right side. All right, let's begin. So this is enslaved people using the cotton gin. And we're going to be reviewing the cotton gin, but I still want you to take notes on it. And you can kind of see here a pretty good illustration of how the cotton gin works, how it is fed, and then the seeds are removed from the fluff in this portion here, and only the fluffy portion comes out here. And as we know, that increased the demand for enslaved labor. So, cotton gin is uppercase A. That's our first subtopic. And the cotton gin, lowercase a, 1 finger length in, increases demand for enslaved labor. This is something you've already taken notes on and know, but I still want you to write this down because it's going to be linked to something else that's coming up in this presentation. Planters begin to expand land holdings. So because cotton can be produced rather easily using this cotton gin, planters want to buy more land, so they want to expand their land holdings. And they begin to claim land in the deep south, and we will see where that is later on in the screencast. But cotton grows very well in the deep south. The coastal South, which is where most enslaved labor existed before this move into the deep South, is where tobacco was grown. But the demand for enslaved labor was decreasing because tobacco's popularity was decreasing. So enslaved labor decreases because tobacco is not as valuable. There was actually thoughts out there by historians that perhaps if there was never the invention of the cotton gin and the realization that cotton could make a lot of money, the belief was that when tobacco lost popularity, it would become unfeasible to own enslaved people, and the practice may have died out, or the laws may have changed earlier than they did. And lowercase d, Southern economy after the invention of the cotton gin is the third largest in the world because of cotton production. The Deep South is producing cotton for the entire world, and that is all on the backs of enslaved labor. So there is certainly a contention that can be made that the country we live in today would not exist if it weren't for the work of enslaved people working in insufferable conditions and not receiving compensation for the work they did. Okay. This map is important because it shows the Deep South, which is here in green. And this is where cotton was grown very well, but the Deep South is primarily the area that I'm circling now. Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, parts of Arkansas, and eastern Texas. And even parts of western Georgia. So that's the Deep South. You can see tobacco was grown up here. And we're going to have a migration or a movement, a forced movement of enslaved labor or African Americans moving from this region into the Deep South to grow cotton. So uppercase B is something called the Second Middle Passage. If you recall, the first Middle Passage was across the Atlantic from Western Africa to the Americas. Now we have the Second Middle Passage. And lowercase a. After the 1808 ban on the importation of enslaved people from Africa, the trade of enslaved people shifts. So no longer are new Africans coming to what is now the United States because of an 1808 law. However, this population is already substantial in the South. There are enslaved people that are forming families and having children, and it's already something that's growing on its own. There's no longer really a need for new enslaved people coming from West Africa because enough people already exist here. A source of labor already exists in America or in the United States. But there is going to be a shift or a second Middle Passage, so another forced migration. Lowercase b, the coastal South begins supplying Deep South with enslaved labor. So people living over here in the coastal South and along here who are growing rice and sugar cane or tobacco are beginning to move into the Deep South, where they are now growing cotton. And C, families are split as the trade of enslaved labor continues. So a lot of family members are left here in the coastal South, and by force, family members are moved into the Deep South. So it's another severing of families that occurred, that started with the first Middle Passage, and now is happening again in the early 1800s because of the second Middle Passage. So this is all happening right around 1808, and it continues happening throughout the early 1800s. And this illustration shows the migration of enslaved people, the forced migration. So in 1790, here's where most enslaved labor existed. Right here in Virginia, and then down by South Carolina, Georgia. But by 1860, because of cotton and the cotton gin, there was a second Middle Passage, and that is enslaved labor moving from this area into the Deep South, which is these dark red areas here, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, western Georgia, and even as far west as eastern Texas. All right. Uppercase C is a very important event in American history, and it's called Nat Turner's Revolt or Nat Turner's Rebellion. This rebellion occurred in 1831. It was in the state of Virginia, and it resulted in the death of 55 to 65 people. We are going to take a look at a video on Nat Turner's Rebellion. The sound might be really loud, so be prepared to turn it down.
Nat Turner's 1831 slave rebellion stuns the nation and pushes the South's slave policing system to its limits.
For white Virginians and white slaveholders across the South, it was a shock.
The paranoia shoots off the scale. 50 dead today, how many dead tomorrow?
In Southampton County, Virginia, Nat Turner, an enslaved preacher, has his own interpretation of the Bible. He believes that God has chosen him to avenge the sins of slavery. As Turner makes his rounds preaching in the fields, he quietly enlists other slaves to his cause. For months, the men meet secretly, conspiring on the plans of their uprising. In the early morning hours of August 21st, 1831, Turner and his men launch one of the largest slave rebellions in American history. The rebels move from home to home, killing every white person they meet. As they advance towards the nearby town of Jerusalem, more recruits join them. The local slave patrols have failed to uncover Turner's plot. So the militia is called out to track down and kill the rebels. For 36 hours, the rebellion rages on. Church bells ring out in distress. Rumors spread among whites that the whole southern slave population has finally exploded in revolt, and that the British are invading to liberate the slaves. As panic swells, the United States government provides important military support, and that support is ensured by slaveholder power.
Don't forget that slavery is protected not only by the slaveholder, not only by the local militia or the state militia, but also by the full force of the military might of the United States of America. Except for that, slavery would not have been possible in the South.
As the hunt for Nat Turner and his men continues, 800 U.S. troops join 2,000 local militiamen. Within a week, the rebellion is squashed. More than 50 rebels are captured. Nearly 60 white men, women, and children have been killed. The violence doesn't fully subside until Nat Turner is captured 2 months later on October 31st, not by a patrol or slave catcher, but by a farmer, by accident. Turner is tried, hanged, and skinned. In all, the state executes 55 black people for conspiring with Turner.
The Turner Rebellion frightened whites literally out of their minds, and yet even that wasn't strong enough to provoke them to get rid of slavery as an institution.
Because for slave owners, profit outweighs morality and their own safety. By 1830, nearly 2 million slaves are fueling the Southern economy, and slaveholders aren't about to give up their free labor. And still, slaves run, and slave hunters expand their networks for tracking them.
Okay, one thing that comes out of the video that's really important is that the South, and especially the planter class, but probably all whites living in the South and some whites living in the North, were very frightened by the idea of a revolt of enslaved people, a violent revolt. And this gave them fear. Because of this fear, there were 2 ways to respond, and we will see those later on in the presentation. So this shows a picture of a revolt of enslaved people. So, anti-slavery argument. These are abolitionists, and they're looking at the Nat Turner Rebellion, and this is what they think, or this is their argument. Lowercase I, Nat Turner's rebellion shows the desperation of enslaved people. They are put into such horrible conditions that this is one of the only ways they can respond to their treatment. And they actually contend that, well, enslaved people have 3 options. They can wait to be sold off to a new owner, or very rarely given their freedom. They can escape, or they can revolt or rebel. So enslaved people are only left with 3 options when it comes to hopefully coping with their horrible conditions. And the one that Nat Turner chose was to revolt. Many escaped, and many put up with, and I put air quotes around put up with, endured the horrible conditions that they were put under, hoping to maybe be sold to an owner that was kinder, but still owned nonetheless. Now, pro-slavery argument, this is lowercase e, is this scares a lot of non-slave states. So even people that are living in the North, in states that don't have slavery, are frightened by this revolt. Especially people that are living in states that support slavery are definitely frightened by this too. So, for supporters of slavery, this revolt justifies the practice of slavery in the South. Slavery is needed to control a dangerous population of people. So supporters of slavery would say, look at what happened with Nat Turner. Clearly, we need to increase slave codes, increase how this population of people are controlled, because look what can happen. So two groups are using this event very differently. One group, the abolitionists, are saying that the conditions are so horrible that sometimes you're only left with the option of revolting. The pro-slavery people are saying, look at how unruly these people are when they're left to their own devices. They can't be liberated. In other words, we must continue, we being the white population, must continue to control them. Okay, these are two important people. Jhansi Calhoun, who the Lake Bede-Makaska was formerly named after, and William Lloyd Garrison. And plans for abolition. One plan to get rid of slavery was the immediate legal end of slavery. So in other words, pass a law and end it immediately. This, of course, posed a lot of economic problems and certainly would scare a lot of whites living in the South and whites living in the North. Another plan was the gradual end by law. So one little law to another law to another law would compensate owners to ease their financial losses, and also might work to ease the assimilation of the enslaved population into mainstream America. And the lowercase c is violent rebellion or war that would spread throughout all the states that endorse slavery, as well as maybe impact states that do not practice slavery. And this, of course, is what happens with the Civil War. Now, this picture of Jhansi Calhoun is important because he supported slavery, gave many speeches in support of the practice, and would have looked at Nat Turner's rebellion as an opportunity to say that slavery is needed to control a population of people that are dangerous. William Lloyd Garrison would have said the opposite. He was a very important abolitionist, and he would have said that slavery needs to be ended because these people that are revolting and resorting to violence or escaping have no other choice but to do that. This is Frederick Douglass. We're going to take some notes on him now. So uppercase E, Frederick Douglass was a former enslaved person, so he experienced slavery throughout his life, was a very powerful public speaker. And this is important because he was a very good speaker and he was well educated. He proved to doubters or pro-slavery people that African Americans were just as capable, if not more capable, than whites. He showed the brilliance, the capacity, for the intellectual capacity of a population of people that are either enslaved or second-class citizens if they are free blacks. William Lloyd Garrison, in the previous slide, would often have Frederick Douglass speak, trying to show those people that doubted the potential of African Americans, he wanted to show their potential. So Frederick Douglass became a very important leader of the abolitionist movement. All right, this concludes the notes, and now you want to pull out the need to knows, and we will write the summary in our next class. Thank you.